Hello, thank you guys for joining us today. We're really excited about this session to talk about narrative attacks, how we can use the Blackbird constellation dashboard as well as Fivecast's Onyx tool to identify narrative attacks and also explore them with really granular detail, understanding how they're evolving over time, but particularly with Onyx's capability, understanding individual actors and where their social footprint may be across the information environment. So these two tools really complement each other, and we're hoping today to how they can both provide a lot of granular insights in the information environment. So just to introduce myself real quick, and then I'll kick it over to my friend Lawson, who's representing Fivecast today. My name is Daniel González. I'm the senior solutions consultant here at Blackbird. My background is as an intelligence analyst. I've previously served the public sector and federal government in identifying mis and disinformation campaigns, and now at Blackbird, helping customers and partners understand the value of our systems and how they can be used to identify narrative attacks. Kick it over to Lawson.
Thanks, Daniel. My name is Lawson Ferguson. I lead Fivecast Tradecraft team of OSINT analysts. We work a lot with our clients across the public sector, private sector, state and local law enforcement, really everything, you name it, to use our tool to further their OSINT analysis and investigations. Really excited to talk with you all today.
Awesome. Thank you, Lawson. Yeah, so today we're going to introduce Blackbird and the Constellation Dashboard, which is our flagship investigations platform. We'll show you how we can take a large data set of social data, identify narrative attacks within it, and investigate them through different lenses. And then once we have identified some actors that maybe require some further investigation analysis, I'll kick it over to Lawson, who can show you how Onyx from the Fivecast stack can help really provide a lot more detail about, again, the broader social footprint that some of these threat actors might have across the information environment. But again, we'll start with narrative intelligence and Blackbird, where we kind of specialize. So just to start from the top, what is narrative intelligence? Essentially, what Blackbird is empowering is the systematic detection, analysis, and interpretation of manipulated narratives. Right. Oftentimes people think of just mis and disinformation, but we've kind of broadened that out to narrative attacks in general, as attacks on the perception of an event, maybe an organization, or broader conflict. That's what we'll be focusing on today. As an example use case is a geopolitical conflict that contained tons of mis and disinformation and narrative attacks. It's crucial to understand not only what is being said within the information environment, but also how that information is being propagated, who might be the parties responsible for it, so you can ultimately determine whether those narrative attacks are really having impact and require some sort of response or mitigation from your teams. That applies to both public sector and private sector use cases. Today's example will be a bit more of a national security and defense example, but we're happy to share materials to show you how we're seeing narrative attacks affect all types of customers and organizations. So what I want to highlight with the Blackbird stack in particular, and how we're approaching the identification and investigation of these narrative attacks, are what we call the 5 lenses. This represents the different approaches that we can take to investigating this data. Usually with narrative attacks, the kind of natural place to start is what is being said, right? Like, what is the claim, allegation, report that is potentially shaping the perception of an event or my organization? So we have an automated approach of identifying narratives out of large data sets of unstructured data across social, news feeds, and even deep and dark web sources. So understanding how a narrative can move across different platforms, move across different audiences is really important to have that kind of broad scope and view to the entire information environment. Once you've understood what the claim is or a report is, what the narrative is, then you have the opportunity on Constellation to investigate the actors, particularly the groups of actors or cohorts, as we call them, that might be ideologically aligned, right? Those could be members of the same activist organization or political affiliation. What we'll look at today are examples of foreign malign influence cohorts, people who are aligned to foreign state propaganda and might have a vested interest in disinforming the public on a particular geopolitical event. Also, we can uncover domains, associated domains with those narrative attacks. Oftentimes, right, networks of domains can be used to promote mis and disinformation and influence operations. And then those networks also, it's really important to consider how they share audiences. Maybe those actors or cohorts represent key influencers that share audiences among each other. Visual representations of those networks are important to understand the evolution of narrative attacks over time. And finally, right, it's understanding also manipulation with these narratives. So is this narrative developing organically, or is there, bot-like activity or heavy coordination and manipulation that's responsible for the propagation of these narratives? Through each of these lenses, right, we can identify narrative attacks. We can also investigate them kind of on top of each other, layered on top of each other, to really fully understand kind of the scale of these narrative attacks. All right, so with that being said, I'm going to jump into the Constellation tool. As I mentioned today, our use case is going to be a national security example. We have a data set here loaded up into Constellation that is assessing all of the narratives related to the incursion of Kursk that occurred in 2024. This is in the context of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, when Ukraine launched a surprise operation incurring into Russian territory, specifically in the Kursk region. So we pulled together a data set of Twitter data, as well as alternative social media, capturing data from Truth Social, Gab, Parler, Rumble, some of those more fringe social networks, forums like 4chan, and even chat groups like public Telegram channels and public Discord channels. A real broad cross-section of the information environment. And you can see across those different sources, we pulled together 1.3 million mentions of this Kursk conflict and incursion. That can be very overwhelming for an analyst. But again, we have those lenses that can help us investigate the data. And instead of trying to find a needle in the haystack, those lenses allow us to automatically surface really where we should be focusing our attention. So a natural place to start an investigation would be the narrative feed, right? A feed of narratives that's going to be automatically clustered for us, that's focusing our attention on the high priority conversations, claims, and allegations that we've identified out of this large data set, all about the incursion of Kursk. So you can see here what we're leveraging a semantic matching algorithm that is automatically identifying all of the posts that are semantically similar, discussing the same topic with the same position on that issue. And we've combined that here with a large language model that provides us narrative headlines telling us what these narrative clusters are discussing. The other key aspect of the narrative feed is this prioritization index. So this is how we really differentiate ourselves from traditional media monitoring tools, not just automatically clustering these narratives for the analyst, but also running them through all of those lenses that I mentioned. So we can measure within a narrative cluster how many bots might be promoting that narrative or propagating that narrative, or if we're seeing a lot of anomalous activity, that artificial manipulation via coordination, like the repeated use of the same hashtags or domains, or even just ripping the same language into different posts. We can measure for things like toxic language and negative sentiment as well, and provide previews of the cohorts that are promoting these narratives. So you really kind of get a profile, an ideological profile of the types of users that might be promoting these narratives. Again, giving you an understanding of what is being said, who's saying it, and how the narrative is being promoted throughout the information environment. So as an analyst, right, I can scroll through this narrative feed and start to get a really good idea of the different conversations, claims, and narratives that are being promoted in the information environment. And if one kind of piques my interest, I can click into it and get even more narrative details. So here also, we're using a large language model to provide a summary of the 434 posts on Twitter and on alternative social media that are all suggesting that chemical weapons were being used against a Russian special forces group in the Kursk region, right? Obviously a very inflammatory claim that we should investigate further. You can see that there's a decent amount of bot-like activity promoting this narrative. We're also seeing a significant signal of manipulation via our anomalous model. And we're also seeing another element of our narrative scorecard and prioritization, high compass risk. So compass risk is our tool that helps to provide additional context outside of the data set that we've collected here. So oftentimes when an analyst comes across an inflammatory claim like this, they'll have to conduct a separate open source intelligence investigation to validate whether that narrative really holds any weight, has been corroborated or verified by any authoritative sources. The Compass context tool is essentially just automating that process, taking the claim that's spreading across Twitter and alternative social media in this case, and then conducting a live web search of trusted sources like media outlets, maybe government websites or NGOs like the Institute for the Study of War. You can see Newsweek is also referenced here. And then basically seeing if the story that's spreading online matches up with that reporting. In this case, with high compass risk, there's high likelihood, right, that this narrative is potentially a piece of mis or disinformation because there's significant variance, right, between what these authoritative sources are saying and what the narrative is suggesting online. We can see here Compass has concluded that these claims are insufficiently substantiated at this time. So with this narrative scorecard, right, we're seeing this narrative cluster, also understanding how the narrative is spreading throughout the information environment. I can now take this narrative cluster and explore it further throughout the rest of my dashboard. So for example, I'll go back to my overview screen. Here we can select our narrative, Ukraine used chemical weapons in Kursk. This is a more comprehensive view of the entire narrative, all mentions of Ukraine using chemical weapons in Kursk, and that we found there on the narrative feed. Here in detailed statistics, I now get individual stats describing some of those metrics that were previewed for me on the narrative feed. So we can see, for example, 14.4% of all of the authors that are suggesting that Ukraine used chemical weapons in Kursk have been flagged as bot-like authors. We're also seeing exactly, of all of the posts in this narrative, how many of them have been flagged for anomalous posting behavior. And then probably most interestingly here, for those cohort models, again, models of users who are ideologically aligned, we're seeing that almost 35%, 1,500 authors, right, that are suggesting this chemical weapons narrative have been flagged as Russian state supporters. Those, again, are users who consistently engage with or promote or share Russian state propaganda. We build these cohort models based on networked activity. So we look for individuals who are consistently engaging with domains or accounts who are associated with Russian state media or Russian state propaganda, and over time are able to develop these cohorts and communities of users who are ideologically aligned. And you can track these cohorts through different data sets. What's really nice about this system is that we also have the ability to build custom cohorts. So if there's a specific community that you're interested in tracking that's more tailored to your use case, we can build that model. And then again, that cohort would become a filter for you throughout the dashboard. We can filter by a specific cohort, like the Russian state supporter cohort here within this narrative, and only take a look now at what those specific actors are saying. And I can combine signals as well. So if I only wanted to see what Russian bots were saying, for example, now we're only looking at 266 posts from 191 authors. It just really quickly filters this data based on signals that matter to me most. And here I can take a look at who those authors are, right? What cohorts they've been tagged to, what platforms they're operating on, the hashtags they're using, the URLs they're sharing. It's a really quick way to get pretty granular in these insights. But the final thing I want to show you here on the Constellation dashboard is, again, a different lens or approach to investigating the same data, the same narrative. We have the ability to generate network graph visualizations as well. So we can do these network graph visualizations in a few different ways. We can take a look at the entire data set and how narratives are spreading across the different data sources that we've pulled into our project here. But we can also compare several narratives to each other and take a look at the authors that are engaged in those narratives and how they might be related to each other via engagements like likes, shares, or retweets. So you can see we've identified quite a few narratives here within our Kursk data set. I've selected 3 that I want to compare to each other. We'll stay with the claims that Ukraine is using chemical weapons in Kursk. We also identified a narrative that suggested that Western mercenaries were fighting alongside Ukrainian forces in Kursk. Those Western mercenaries, specifically coming from France and Poland, that, if true, would represent a massive escalation in this conflict, right? So also a bit of a fishy narrative that we want to explore and see how it compares to these other 2 that we found. The final narrative are just reports of Russians surrendering to those Ukrainian forces in the Kursk region. So we've colorized these narratives, blue, yellow, and pink, as you can see here. And we're going to take a look again at all of the authors that are participating in those different narratives. This network visualization is going to show me all of those authors. We zoom in here, you'll see they're represented by these nodes. So these nodes represent different accounts, and the lines in between them represent engagements, interactions on social media. So in this case, on a platform like Twitter, for example, it would be likes or shares or retweets. So really quickly with this network visualization, a few things jump out at me. First is that there is a ton of overlap between our blue and yellow narratives. The claims that Ukraine was using chemical weapons in Kursk and the claims that Western mercenaries were fighting alongside Ukrainian forces in the Kursk region. And then there is some connection, but pretty loose connections. Essentially, we have 2 competing echo chambers here. Up here in pink, again, we have the reports of Russian surrender. But nothing like the amount of coordination that we're seeing between these 2 narratives in yellow and blue down here. What we can also quickly identify are who those key influencers are that are, kind of most prominently engaged or promoting content within these narratives. So for example, we have, this account at Slaty71, that's kind of the biggest influencer in the Western mercenaries narrative. This account, Ozzy Kozak, we have another one at SMOVZ. It's very easy for us to pinpoint who the key conversation drivers are in these narratives that represent a lot of the connection and overlap, right, between the 2 seemingly disparate conversations or narratives that we're looking at. Again, remember, if we didn't have this network visualization, we would be looking at these 2 different narratives in isolation, not really understanding that there's a ton of overlap in the audiences that are promoting both of these narratives in this data set. If we wanted to take this one step further, and again, pull in maybe a different lens, not just looking at this via the lens of network, but also understanding the lens of cohort, for example, giving us a better idea of who these actors are. We could pull up the Russian state supporter cohort model that we were taking a look at previously. I'm going to set a colorization filter here to highlight in red all of the users who are Russian state supporters, again, users who promote Russian state propaganda. And you can see really clearly, right, not only did we identify all of that coordination between those 2 narratives, lobbing criticisms at Ukraine, we can now see with our cohort filter that a lot of those accounts are known Russian state supporters and propagandists. So this is another key validation point. Not only did the Compass context check tell us that that narrative was unsubstantiated by trusted sources, and not only did this network graph identify for us that there was tons of coordination between 2 narratives criticizing Ukraine, demonstrating that there was a manipulation effort here to artificially propagate these narratives to different audiences. We now also have the lens of cohort that tells us that these users have a concerted political agenda here, right, to promote Russian state propaganda, in this case, against Ukraine. So that's the different levels of insight that we can provide using these network graphs. The final thing that I want to show you here is a time series bar. So we can also understand how these narratives develop over time. So I'm going to zoom in here to when the majority of the activity across these 3 narratives was occurring in our data set here. Each of these bars represents a different period of time. So if we look at, again, these 3 narratives on this network graph, we can see that the first nodes that light up in activity in early August of 2024 were those reports of Russian surrender. Those were the first kind of conversations that we saw across these three narratives, those nodes at the top. But then over time, we start to see the activation of the Russian state supporters down at the bottom in those two narratives. So this is a pretty clear example of what we see in terms of narrative and counter narrative. The reports of Russian surrender in the Kursk region were really embarrassing to Russia. And so they activated this disinformation network of Russian state supporters to try and distract with disinformation campaigns and narrative attacks from those embarrassing losses on the field. And then you see over time kind of the competition for the information battle space, how narratives and counter narratives counteract each other. So from this view, again, we can now take our investigation a bit deeper. We can investigate who some of these influencers that are promoting these disinformation narratives are. I mentioned, right, it's very easy for us to identify the influencers and conversation drivers. This is where Fivecast Onyx can be super helpful to maybe create a footprint for some of these influencers and see where the other places they might be propagating influence operations across the information environment. So I'm going to stop here on Constellation and turn it over to Lawson to talk about how Onyx can help us out in this investigation as well.
Thanks very much, Daniel. Really cool, and I'm very excited to show you how Onyx's investigative capabilities can be leveraged to take analysis even a step further from the very interesting narrative analysis that Blackbird's tool brought to us. I want to show you what Fivecast Onyx, our open source intelligence, really analyst-driven investigative tool, can bring to the table. And I thought I would start with the very, very basics, where here on the screen you see one of the Twitter accounts that Daniel showed us belonging to Zloty. I looked at that and I thought, hey, let's run a data collection on Zloty. As part of that process, I very quickly found his backup account, which is Zloty_72. And so I included both of those in here. I included both of those in here because this is essentially showing how Onyx works. What Onyx does is it enables users to collect publicly available social media data and deep and dark web data from any of these platforms right here. It does it anonymously, it does it securely, and users can achieve goals like what I'm going to show you, which is collecting data about Zloty. We know Zloty was participating in these narratives thanks to Blackbird's tool and their really cool analytical capabilities. What this step would enable you to do within Onyx is to collect a bunch of data and incorporate that into your analysis of the person, and not just understand that person, but ideally end up feeding back into your intelligence cycle with more information about their audience and potentially some other actors. And even if I think I did just this with Zloty, collected his tweets from these two accounts and was able to analyze them in a way that I'll go over shortly, I think that would be very useful. However, an important part of the process that Onyx enables and helps with is not just collecting data from known accounts like Zloty_71 or Zloty_72 here, or SMOVZ, which Daniel also pointed out and I have collected on as well, but decided to focus on Zloty for the purposes of this presentation. What it's going to allow you to do is not just collect data about those accounts, which is great and is absolutely useful, but it's also going to help you go beyond that with our discovery capability, which you can see as a tab up here. I put together a brief PowerPoint of results for this just for the sake of everyone's time. But essentially, what discovery enables users to do is, with a starting point like just a social media handle or a name, a phone number, email address, anything like that, learn more about someone's online footprint. This includes things like presence in data breaches, mentions or accounts on the dark web across many of the social media platforms you see right here, and a whole host of other information. There's a lot, so I'm just going to show you what I was able to find for our friend Zloty here. And the term that I use or hear used a lot is online footprinting, right? We have information about Zloty71, who is at Zloty71 on Twitter, username is Zloty_71. So when I footprinted him, I did two things, really, which is, as you can see from the searches I did, you can see the sources that I looked across for both the username with and without the underscore, because one was like the account handle and one was the username. Not a huge difference, but I wanted to make sure to cover all my bases. And then I searched that both by account handle and name, simply because of the databases that Onyx has access to, sometimes treating the account name and username differently. I'm sure those of you who've used similar discovery capabilities or even Google dorking will be familiar with that kind of idea, right? Just including the same data in a slightly different field just to see what answers come up. And I got some pretty interesting results. You can see some of the raw number counts on the screen here. But instead of showing you all those, and why I'm showing you a PowerPoint, is I just want to take you to the results here. And for some of these results, there's a couple different things that are very interesting to highlight. One is that just simply searching the username Zloty71 across a bunch of social media sources and just open web sources, I found a YouTube account belonging to him with actually the same profile picture as was present on the Twitter account. So I was very confident that belonged to the same person. The Telegram or the Instagram account you see here, a little bit harder to say one way or another, right? That flag clearly has Arabic script on it. Beyond that, I don't know. But at least it was saying, hey, there is a user here and I can take a look. The other thing I want to highlight for you, though, that I thought was really, really interesting was when I ran the username Zloty72 through one of our data sources, it brought these results back that you see here in the network chart on the left hand of the screen. It brought back results that tied that moniker, Zloty72, to an email address at Gmail, and it tied that to a man named Michael in Germany. Blurred his last name because I can't be sure it's him, but I just thought this was interesting, right? This is an example of the way the discovery feature is already taking me places that I wasn't already. It's found some other accounts for me online, YouTube, potentially Instagram. It found some TikToks as well that I'll show you in a little bit. But it's also showing me addresses, phone numbers, potential WhatsApp profiles for this guy, along with a potential Facebook profile tied to an email address that we have, right? It also is saying this person is in Germany with a couple German phone numbers, which I thought was very interesting because on Zloty's Twitter account, it doesn't say where he's from. The tweets are mostly in English, so I would have just maybe assumed that he was from an English-speaking country, but we're seeing maybe Germany could be a place to look for this individual, and maybe the name Michael is something we want to look at. So with that in mind, I did a few things, mostly flipped to do a search on the email address and the phone numbers that were applied, found some more information. I also, though, made sure to review results from elsewhere on the web. And I found something very interesting here as well, which is the names with the moniker Zloty71 appears to have been tied to an account with someone's name on it, Juric_Zlatko. So Zlatko Juric, right? Apologies if I'm mispronouncing that. That appeared in this old tweet that someone had posted on another social media site. You clearly see the screen name is Zloty71. It's verified, but the handle is at Juric_Zlatko. I'll also say that in the screenshot in the middle here, which is from Onyx's discovery tool, it's saying in a data breach, in two separate data breaches of Twitter, the handle Zloty71 was tied to this exact Twitter account. So now I have two sources that are telling me the same thing, that this account was managed or run by someone whose name appears to have been Zlatko Juric. So we have Zlatko Juric. We also have this Michael name. Maybe it's just a totally different person. Maybe it's a name that this person adopted to make it easier to spread mis and disinformation online. I don't know, right? But it gives me some investigative avenues to chew on while I'm thinking about the actual content that he's posting as well, right? So it's not just about the content here. It's about expanding our universe and our understanding of this person's presence online and getting information like former screen names that may expose Zlatko's name, right? And I'll also point out we have another result here from an even older Twitter account where we have Zloty71 Juric is another name. Again, when I was looking at all this, I was just building confidence essentially in the finding that the person driving this account is named or named themselves at some point as Zlatko Djuric, right? So I put all this together. I could have spent probably another hour talking to you about the results from the discovery where you were able to take a look at these old usernames, take a look at phone numbers and emails, and keep building an understanding. But I want to get back to the social media element of it all because that's really where we can put a neat little bow on how the Blackbird tool and Fivecast's capabilities really interact with each other. So we're going to go back to the system right now. So, where we started with just one or two Twitter accounts directly from Blackbird, that would have been much harder, if not impossible, to identify without a tool showing us that they were a real driver of conversation. I now have the ability to search on a couple other accounts. I showed you the TikTok and YouTube. I also was able to locate a Telegram account run by this individual. The profile picture was the same, so it was a really easy thing for me to conclude was run by the same individual. I ultimately decided that that Instagram account we saw wasn't high confidence enough that it was worth including, although I put a pin in it, right, for further deep dives later. And I just collected data from these accounts. Very simple. It's public. Onyx was able to automate the data collection, meaning that neither I nor any of my coworkers had to turn around and actually manually write down or download these images, these videos, etc. All very neat, all very easy. And once that data is collected, the tool allowed me to dive deeper on it. So I've already actually done this, so I'm not going to walk you through the collection process, but this is what the results look like. I was able to collect 56,000 pieces of publicly available social media data from the social media accounts that I identified belonging to Zlati, and this is the SMOVZ guy as well. I found his Telegram account right here. You can see Zlati. This is his Telegram profile picture. We can see his information over here. We can also see that when we collect on his profile, following these links will actually take you to a website where Zlati has listed his other presences online. So it's easy to verify some of that discovery information, right? So I was really grateful to this man for, letting us know where he is everywhere. But I was able to put all this together. And again, we collected 56,444 pieces of publicly available data spanning the time period of April 2022 all the way up to March or April, or actually June of 2025. So I actually deliberately didn't rerun this more recently simply because I wanted to show you what a snapshot in time looks like and how it may inform analysis in the future, right? But we've got a couple things to start with here. We've got volume over time for activity. We have sentiment and emotion. This is not dissimilar to maybe some of what you saw in Blackbird, but the point I'm going to keep making here is this is targeting at just an individual, or really two in this case, right? Two of our main drivers of misinformation in the case that Daniel showed us, right? Where the response to some embarrassing reports about Kursk was to start flooding the zone with mis and disinformation about what was happening in Ukraine and Russia. So in this case, we see a big spike in activity in March going into April, May, and June, again, in response to these accusations. We see sentiment analysis and emotion analysis, which Onyx allows you to track over time, see how your audience is feeling about things. I love this word cloud, especially when tracking narratives, because it is humble, it is very basic. I think we've all seen word clouds before. But in this case, when I'm tracking, what I think people promoting mis and disinformation are doing is it's going to show me, of course, we're talking a lot about Ukraine. We're talking a lot about Russia, the Russian flag, the American flag, the Ukrainian emoji flag are all showing up a lot. And that's not surprising at all. If I click on them, I can see that. But the things I actually like paying attention to are the smaller words, because that could be an indication that there are narratives that are starting to bubble up, right? Because with Blackbird, we saw a lot of Zlati and SMOVZ's conversations around Russia and Ukraine. It might be interesting, I would think, for many investigators. Once you've identified an account pushing misinformation in one area, you may want to understand, one, more about that individual, which is where that discovery piece comes into play. But you also may want to understand what are other narratives this person is talking about. If they are being funded or they're just being used as a useful idiot by foreign actors, it's really good to know what direction their work is going. And right here, what caught my eye, in addition to maybe some emojis, some special terms, one of the news organizations that one of these individuals works for, is a lot of references to Israel and Gaza, right? Not surprising given what's going on in the world. But it at least gives us a window into how often this person is talking about something else entirely. And here I clicked, I see 3,363 of the posts pertained to Israel or referenced the word Israel. So it's not just Ukraine and Russia that this person is talking about or these people are talking about. Um, there also are other narratives they're interested in. Not quite as interested, obviously, as what we've seen already, but it's useful to know about, right? The same people talking about and spreading what appears to be Russian backed or Russian pro-Russian mis and disinformation are also posting about what's going on in the Middle East, right? And this could maybe be a sub-narrative that you want to check on. Maybe you want to take this, run it back through your Blackbird tool to understand the narratives around what's happening here, because they're going to be different, and find other actors. Find the Israel-Iran or Israel-Gaza equivalent of Zloty and SMOVZ, right? The people really driving your conversation, and do the same thing with them, right? And this also highlights for me one of the really important capabilities of Onyx, which is to allow you to drill deeper on the actual information that's been collected, right? It's a very targeted tool designed to collect this public data. And I've collected 56,444 posts using this tool, all of which could have been collected manually. They could all have been Control F, find change, use the find function to look across someone's page, but that takes forever. It's not reliable because all the data isn't always there. And also there can be a real security risk. This has taken all of that risk out of my hands. I'm looking at it in a safe space. And I can also search it. So we searched Israel earlier to find the 3,000 odd posts that mention the word Israel. But here what I really wanted to see was I wanted to see posts that mentioned Zlatko or Juric. Because when I looked through a lot of his posts recently, he's completely removed all mentions of that name from his social media. It's completely gone, right? So at some point over the last couple of years, he's decided to stop using his proper, what we're thinking at least, is his proper name, his government name, as people say, right? So I want to go back in time and see if he slipped up somewhere along the way and see if I can really start building even more bits of information about Zlatko being the person behind the account here that's spreading mis and disinformation. That took a little while. I guess my Wi-Fi was feeling sleepy today. But right here, I can see 124 references to either Zlatko or Juric, right? And I can see people just responding to him. Someone says, "How are you doing, Zlatko?" And we see old posts from 2024 that are that are being posted to the account at Juric_Zlatko. Why would they show up when we collected on this account? Well, it shows up because for those of you who are familiar with the Twitter interface, if someone changes their handle, the old tweets that were tagged or referenced to that person are still tagged with that name, right? So we have confirmation that this account is the same one or is linked to the current one, the handle for which is at Zloty71 or 72, right? So we see people talking to him as early as 2024 and referencing Zloty at the, at Zlatko as recently as 2025. We see here Zloty 72, the backup account, appears to have been tied to maybe a Zlatko Juric backup account as well, right? So we see all these, references here. We see stuff in other languages that we can automatically translate. All of the images and videos are collected, so this is just a GIF, right? But I can see this. It will do a quick analysis of the content in the image or video. It also extracts text from collected images and videos. So if people are posting posters or unit badges, patches, something like that, you can see the text. But you can see over here, here's even a post from Zloty, right? Confirming what we were looking for, right? Zloty72 posted in 2023, tweeting at Mr. Polyansky that his account has been suspended. And if you like that, you'll like this backup account, right? So if we had any doubts about this being a backup account or about this name, I think we can dispel them pretty clearly. And there's a couple other examples of this as well, where we have some pretty clear confirmation that he switched account names at one point and has since completely pivoted away from mentioning the name. If you look at the Telegram, it doesn't come up, anything like that. So that's how I see the Onyx tool and its deep dive analysis capabilities, collection and analysis capabilities, really helping users of the Blackbird platform, right? You've used that to identify your mis and disinformation spreaders And guess what? That could be the end of it, right? You've got a pretty neat report right there. But if you want to take that next step and really learn more about the people that are doing the mis and disinformation spreading, a tool like Fivecast Onyx that's going to be able to drill down on your individuals, find more about them online, and confirm, in this case, bits of information about a known spreader of misinformation, confirm a name. We may even have a location in Germany, right? You don't know. We don't know. But there's all these breadcrumbs that you can then pick up and run with that would be really, really difficult otherwise without the capability to collect thousands and thousands of posts and then drill down on them for simple things like references to a name you know, or a location, or another narrative that you're seeing bubble up.
Yeah, thanks, Lawson. Yeah, I think that's a great. I mean, if we zoom out a little bit here and think about where we started, right? Just a data collection and all mentions of the Kursk invasion, and then finding individual narratives within that could contain elements of disinformation or information operations, understanding the groups of users who would be promoting those information operations and how they're doing it, and then getting to the granular actual actors and influencers, the conversation drivers, and understanding, again, kind of broadening it out from those individual actors to their full social footprint with a tool like Onyx. We now have a really good kind of map of the machinations of information operations. And again, we just started with a very broad data collection. So I think both of these tools, Constellation and Onyx, provide different flavors of open source intelligence insights that are really kind of unrivaled and unavailable. And the other approach would just be incredibly manual and super time intensive. So the automation and efficiency that both of these tools are introducing to OSINT workflows is pretty unmatched. We're really excited to answer any questions you guys have, or please reach out if you guys want more information on these platforms and the other tech that we're developing.